Next on call, coping with grief
I had to make the best decision every day that I could.
and loss.
Funding for this program is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Television.
and by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding provided by Dakota Care, the Brookings Health System, Regional Health, the South Dakota American College of Physicians, and Swiftel Communications. Closed captioning for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.
There's the valve.
And which was healthier, the yogurt and the bagel?
All right, I'm going to start by measuring the size of it.
You could also add grilled chicken to this recipe.
Blow hard! Blow, blow, blow! Keep pushing.
And try to push your head.
Pull red handle to open bag.
Hello and welcome to On Call. I'm Tammy Watson. Sometimes our show topics get a little serious here. That's what you can expect from a medical show. We talk about healthcare concerns that can really bring human beings to their weakest moments. And so it is with tonight's show. We're going to talk about coping with grief and loss. But we are determined to make this show not only informative, but also entertaining and highly watchable. How do we intend to do that, you ask? Well, we have a panel of physicians that are well versed in explaining the natural processes of life and death and the emotions and natural reactions that accompany end-of-life issues. Here in our studio, ready to answer your questions about coping with grief and loss, are Dr. Deborah Johnston, Dr. Peter Reynen, and our medical editor, Dr. Rick Holm. Our phone number is 1-888-DOCTOR-ON-CALL. Again, that's 1-888-376-6225. And helping answer the phones tonight are our great volunteers from the South Dakota State University Pre-Professional Science Club. Dr. Holm, before you introduce our guests, I wanted to ask you a question about the physical manifestation of grief. What do you see in your patients when they come in and they're grieving? What's the most common physical ailment?
Back pain.
Back pain?
Can't sleep. Headache, pain. Pain is a real deal.
So it's
people suffer in a variety of different ways, and sometimes the hardest thing is to ferret out what the real bottom line is. Sometimes it's a terrible loss, and it manifests. Guys in particular won't admit that they feel bad, so it comes out in a physical symptom, I think. But it varies. Some people, there's a tremendous variability. So this
to talk about.
Oh, this is a huge topic, and as you said, Tammy, this should not be a sad topic. This is a topic that should be uplifting. One of the things that you get through with this kind of thing is with a sense of humor. So I'd like to see a little sense of humor. I told them they've got to laugh, and we need to bring a little joy. This should be a fun. This should be our yearly comedy laugh show, right? Like Garrison Keillor does, right? No. Okay.
I don't know if that was a yes exactly.
That was a kind of a roll the eyes kind of a thing.
Go ahead and introduce our guests.
Yeah.
Who do we have?
I'm pleased to introduce to you our guest this evening, Dr. Deborah Johnston from the Avera Brookings Medical Clinic and Dr. Peter Reynen from the Avera Millbank Medical Center. Thank you both for being here.
Glad to be here.
So, Deb, why would I ask you to be involved with a grief and suffering show? I mean, what would it be that made me decide to pick you?
Because you like to pick on me?
Yeah, that was it. That's it. No.
I think it's because I am not afraid to get emotional with my patients. And I think that one thing about being a physician is that it's often a very emotional, very intimate relationship with your patients. And that's something that I didn't understand as a young person heading into medicine. And when seasoned physicians would talk about that, I'd kind of roll my eyes and think that, they were kind of full of it. And I think the average person doesn't have that relationship with their physician until they come to a point in their life where they're in crisis, where there's some major event, sometimes a birth, a serious illness, and certainly death and the dying process. And I've gone through that with a lot of people, and it is a real privilege to be a part of that family and that individual's transition.
I'll tell you why I picked. Your answer was pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it illustrates exactly why I picked you. You know, you have an emotional intelligence that is so good. You know, you have a sense of the nuances of a person's inner being, and some people don't have that.
He didn't pick you for emotional intelligence.
Now why do you think I picked you?
I quit trying to fathom or plumb the depths of your mind, Rick. I don't know.
Dr. Reynen.
Speed dial.
This is where we're going to get the humor. We're going to be picking on Rick for this show.
Now this is Dr. We have to go through this. Dr. Johnston is a family physician. Now, Dr. Reynen, what are you?
I also am a family physician and on that whole spectrum.
I think you went into it for the money. That's what I think it was the money that made you guys.
He's double doctor, right?
Double doctor. No, but what tell us about your double job. I mean, a little bit more about what you do besides practicing.
Well, I'm having less of a double job now that some of those, I'm also a pastor. I went to seminary and served some churches through medical school, and as recently, for the last 5 years, up until about last July, and then dumped those back onto the lap of more capable individuals, and so now I'm just a doctor again.
Just doctor again.
Except in the theology of my faith, I'd say whatever you're doing, you're a minister. And it's not whether you're in the pulpit or not, it's who you are and how you live your life, and that's another topic altogether. But
I think that's exactly what we're talking about tonight, how to care for people who are grieving. And I think we really need to be a minister to do that. Well, what an honor to be in the same room with you two. And we really would really like to have some calls. Let's talk about grief. I think the best way to do a difficult topic like that is to tell stories. Do you have a story? Give us a call. We'll be right back after this.
Bereavement is the period after a loss during which grief is experienced and mourning occurs.
One of the things we're probably going to talk about tonight is hospice. The mission of hospice is to provide care that will comfort and support patients and their families. It's designed for individuals who are dealing with an illness that no longer responds to treatments targeted toward curing a disease or medical condition. It's palliative care. Basically, if you cannot be cured, this is the type of care that will ease your suffering until your life ends. To this end, a group of volunteers in Brookings, South Dakota works with hospice to offer a unique service. With our very own Dr. Holm as their leader, a group of men ranging from college age to retirement age visit hospice patients with the gift of song, performing hymns that are truly intended to comfort and console.
Shall we gather at the river? And it is well with my soul, and let's get started. Hey.
The Brookings Hospice Singers are a somewhat random group of men who share two important passions, a love of music and a strong desire to offer comfort. Hospice singer Richard Smith explains.
You know, I hope it gives some comfort and inspiration to men and women that are in hospice, and knowing why they're in hospice, and really it gives me inspiration too, to be able to see how they react to the songs that we sing, and sometimes they join us in those songs, and that's a happy occasion.
Jerry McCullough, another hospice singer, agrees.
I think when a person is in a hospice, sometimes there's a feeling of despair, loneliness, that you're forgotten, and the fact that we come around and sing with them, and then sometimes they sing along with us. I think it gives them and their families encouragement because we go right into their homes. And I think it gives me a good feeling because I get a chance to do something that help encourage them, encourage their families too, let them know they're not forgotten.
Ryan Kleinjohn, a college student at South Dakota State University, is one of the younger men in this singing group. For him, singing for hospice patients is a way to grow beyond the academic environment and be part of something greater.
It's kind of a way out of ordinary life. It kind of goes and it makes me feel good to go and give something to other people that hopefully will make them feel better. I hope that what we do brings comfort to people as they're going through their times with their families, and I'm just happy that I can give.
When other helpless fail and comfort flee.
Dr. Holm, you're very much a part of this group. Tell me, how did it get started?
Well, there was a fabulous a cappella men's singing group in Brookings, 10 years ago. Brian Schmidt, who was a student here, very talented man, started a group of men's singers that were primarily college kids. And then it became a college community thing, and subsequently I just could not dry out. Well, they took me, and it was a great joy to be led by first Brian and then by Steve Greaves, who was the director of music here. So here is this crackerjack group of mostly college kids who were majoring in music, and I'm part of this, and it's been a joy to do this. But I think as things go by, the college kids kind of drifted, and Dr. Greaves was overwhelmed, and suddenly it was going to go away. And we had, somewhere along the line with Dr. Greaves' leadership, decided that we would go sing Christmas carols, and we sang Christmas carols to one of my dear friends who was dying, and there was something very nice about that. And Greaves had read where people were doing this in the East Coast, a couple places, and why not do it here? And so our group that would spend maybe 2 hours every Tuesday night practicing turned to doing 1 hour practicing and then going out and singing for a half an hour. It has evolved after Dr. Greaves left to a group of community people and a couple college kids, and it isn't great led, but you know, and it's
the weak link.
The weak link, you know. But you know, and the joy is of the doing. It isn't really the quality of the music so much as the quality of the gift, and it is so well received. We sang Tuesday night to a beautiful gentleman and his wife who, he's not in our hospice, but he is in his 90s. He has significant heart disease, and he fits in one sense. And we just, you know, it isn't just always people who are dying of cancer. It's people who are in that deal. And, you know, the young kids in that group, and you heard Ryan, and I mean, you know, we're the winners.
Well, one thing that I do hope we touch on, I'm going to try and steer the conversation that way right now. It's you have figured out in your group what to do. A lot of us, when death comes by to someone we know, we do not know what to do. We're not comfortable, and so what, you know, if you're not the one directly dealing with the loss, but you are a town, you know, belong to the same town or belong to the same congregation, how do we go here and talk about it?
You know, that's the question. You know, aside from church, you know, or if you're a physician and you're involved directly with a dying patient, how do the rest of the people have a clue to, and what can they do, and how do you be involved, and what would be some suggestions?
I don't think there's any right answer to that. I don't think there's any wrong answer to that. I think the only answer to that is to be there. A phone call, how you doing? You know, I saw this butterfly today, and it made me think of you because of the time we were out at McCrory Gardens and we saw that butterfly. And I think just reaching out and being there is...
There's not particularly things...
Exactly. There's no formula. There's no magic words. You're not going to say the right thing.
We're all petrified we're going to say the wrong thing.
I don't know that there's necessarily a wrong thing either, as long as you're motivated by kindness. I suppose if you deliberately tried to say something awful, you could. But
They're quite nice.
What kind of person do you think I am?
People worry about saying, the wrong thing, and sometimes people misconstrue what's being said with the best intentions. But I would echo that too. That we think about human doings. What do I do? What do I do? And you don't have to do a thing. We're there, and there's even a name for that called the ministry of presence. You just are there. You don't have to say the right thing. You don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing. You're just there. And people are always looking around. Are there dishes that can be done? What can I do? But it's just being there and maintaining those human connections.
This brings me to mind when a patient of yours dies. I'm asking both of you. Mm-hmm. I have, it's hard to take the time away from your practice. You've got all these people lined up and so on and so forth, but there's an evening visitation kind of a thing, and I sometimes make that. I mean to make it more often than I do, but do you guys go to the funerals? Do you do the visitations? Do you write a note? I mean, how do you handle it when a death occurs in your practice?
I try to write a note, and I try to go to visitations. I don't go to nearly as many as I'd like to. Funerals, of course, are usually in the middle of the day and short notice and not something that's easy to make it to, but I do try to write a note and share a memory.
Yeah.
That's right. I usually do that. I try to write a letter about a week later when kind of the dust has settled down a little bit and family and others have left, and there can be kind of this lull where people have a profound sense of loneliness and loss, and try to send a letter in the middle of that. I try and kind of catch that. And as far as the wakes or the visitations or the funerals, maybe 10%, if that, something. I try, but they're also, right, and I think, and people I hope understand, but the work is to the living, and while showing up can show respect for that individual and care for the family, it's about taking care of the next person who's coming into my clinic too, because they also have needs, and trying to balance that is tough. You can't be everywhere.
Yeah.
But
now let me ask you this: there is pretty good scientific data that the highest risk patient for suicide, the highest risk person for suicide, is a male who's elderly and just lost his spouse. And when we have a guy whose wife just died, that's the guy who really needs to be surrounded by some love, because that person is high risk for suicide, and it happens. Any comments?
I think it's a risk. What I try and do is invent a reason for an appointment 2 to 4 weeks after something like an event, and sometimes it varies depending on whether that death was sudden or whether we could see it coming for a while and people have more time to prepare, what that person's support around them otherwise is, where family's at, but checking in on them.
Can I cheat? How self-aware do I have to be if I'm dealing with loss and I want to talk to somebody? Do I have to come in, make an appointment with my physician to say I'm dealing with grief, or if I come in and say
sore throat?
Yeah.
I got a sore throat.
Are you going to bust my chops on that?
No. Make up a reason. Get in.
Yeah.
I need to be seen right away.
I mean, is the question, do you need to tell the receptionist I'm feeling lousy, I don't want to be seen, or?
Yeah. Or,
they never do that. Okay. Rarely, maybe. It is, I'm tired, whatever, yeah.
Okay. I've got the worst headache in my whole life, I got to see the doctor. Okay. It's about this, and what you walk in the room and they just pour out the truth.
Or they don't. Because how many times have you seen the person who has managed to build such a wall that they haven't managed to put it together, that they're going through this terrible, hard time in their life, and they haven't connected the reason that they feel so terrible, that they're not sleeping, that their appetite's rotten, that they're so tired and so exhausted, and their head hurts, and everything is because, gee, a month ago this horrible thing happened to you.
Or more than a month. I had a patient who, we were getting, hypertension, whatever, tough old farmer. And I was getting ready to leave. Yeah, I've got my hand on the door. And he says, I had a Peter once. And I thought, oh, here we go. You take your hand off the door, you sit back down, and about my age, about 50 years ago, his son had been killed in a farm accident that he was involved in, and 50 years later, this tough old farmer still crying there telling me about his son. And I think that stuff just never goes away.
Oh, particularly if he feels it was his fault or there could have been his fault, or I mean, you know,
it doesn't matter whether it's fault, you blame yourself.
Well, of course they do. I mean, you know, they all blame themselves. We all blame ourselves whenever there's a death of any kind to people who are close to us. The problem is that blaming doesn't help anything, and generally that blaming hurts a lot. It hurts.
It surprised me because I thought, here we are about 50 years later, and that's still so fresh and so raw for this person, and it comes out in a circumstance like that. And I thought, I mean, we do need to do a better job helping people work through it. Not that it won't come up 50 years later anyway, but we need to work through some of those things so people can live the life they have.
Before we get to the questions, let's talk about working through grief and how can people do that?
Well, yeah, I think we hit a really important point here that needs, that grief sometimes is, if something bad happened and there was nothing that I can do, I mean, I did everything that could, and that person died anyway, then I sleep well at night. I mean, I feel very bad and I'm empty, but I still sleep. But there's that time when shoulda, coulda, wish I woulda, and the guilt that we put on. And I mean, if you think it's physicians, it's also wives and husbands and children and parents, and that's when the grief is the worst. You make an innocent mistake and somebody is harmed by it. How do you handle that? Debbie.
Oh, geez, of
You're
course.
crying.
I am crying.
Why? What did that?
Oh, this is...
Let's hear it.
Well, not anything specific, but I see this so often with my patients, particularly people who, I promised Mom I'd never put her in the nursing home.
So the guilt there.
Oh, that's a horrible one. Families struggle so much with that. It takes they do this superhuman effort and keep their loved one at home as long as they can. And when they can't do it anymore because they're exhausted, their health is failing, they can't meet the needs of their loved one, and they finally put their loved one in the nursing home, and then there's so much guilt. And it's so hard for those people.
I think the guilt that... I think that's one of the major things about grief. I mean, it really is. And, it's what I should have done. I mean, they should have. This whole world is full of that. Peter, you're kind of...
A normal, healthy person, you're going to feel guilty even though there's no reason for it.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you work through that?
Dr. Reynen?
Well, what I would say, I think we have an artificially elevated expectation of ourselves, and whether we're talking about grief or depression or other things, or as a physician, what I can do and what I can't, I really have to be realistic. And now we're maybe slipping into a different topic, but from my end, in understanding what I can do and what I can't do, being honest, and my patients, I don't think expect me to be perfect. They expect me to try, they expect me to care, and they should. And things happen. The second guessing, and that's what educational experience is about in some ways, is learning and moving on. But if there's not any moving on, then we haven't learned anything. So it has to be both of those things. Yeah. And to carry, if I go to bed every night at peace with the relationship with my wife, heaven forbid something happens, but at least I don't have guilt about that we've done our part. And would there be loneliness? Would there be bereavement? I certainly would expect that if we're normal and if we're healthy, but the guilt doesn't have to be there. It's something that we choose to carry, and how to pass that is a difficult thing.
Well, and some carry that better than others, and some people have been driven their whole life on a guilt level, and that's the only way they live. I mean, that's how they were raised by
work harder.
You should. You did this to me. Yeah. You should. And the kid grows up with a guilt thing instead of a praise thing.
Okay. Well, I'm going to jump into the questions right now. We have a caller from Brookings, South Dakota. A lady lost her mother and aunt recently, and in the past 5 years has lost 6 very close people. And all I do is sleep for an hour, stay up for an hour, back to sleep. Don't have an age on this individual, but I just life's been taking its toll on her, and thoughts of, you know, how to find some brightness in a world.
Poor woman. What a terrible burden she's got with all that loss. Loss is, there's a scale that talks about life stressors and ranking various events, and the more of these stressors and the more stressful these stressors are, the higher an individual is at risk for depression. And a situation like this where somebody is having difficulty doing anything but sleep, but difficulty maintaining sleep, difficulty finding any brightness in their day, I would be very concerned that this individual had slipped from grieving and bereavement into depression. And that's probably somebody who really should reach out and go speak with their physician, speak with a counselor. There are, you know, no drug in the world, no talking in the world is going to make the loss go away. But they can help you start organizing your life again so that you can figure out how to live your life around the holes.
Yeah, I think there's a time for medicine. I mean, the real question we could discuss when we come back is, when do you say, okay, that's enough grieving, time to move on to some medicine?
Okay, we'll come back to that. First to the videotape. We first brought you this next story a while back. It's a story about loss, what we're talking about tonight, and a story about a family who saw a loved one come to live and die with dementia. Cassie Wipf was born in 1925, and in the newspaper her obituary told of how she grew up on a farm with 11 brothers and sisters, and how she later raised a family with her husband Leonard. Like most obituaries, it didn't dwell on the difficulties of her age and failing health, nor the challenges faced by her family as her health declined. Cassie's son Rick Wipf spoke with On Call about his mother's health problems and about dealing with the loss of a loved one. Rick, we're here to ask you questions about your mother and her health and how you coped with that. So, in a nutshell, tell me about your mother.
6 years ago this month, actually, she had her first stroke. And the first stroke and most of the rest of them didn't really affect physically, but affected her cognitive abilities and speech abilities. And the first one affected her ability to say certain words and also most names, at least unfamiliar names, that, you know, not family names. And that was a big challenge for her to adjust to. She loved to talk and visit, and so it was hard for her to adjust to not being able to say certain people's names or think of certain words. Until the last one, all of them just affected cognitive or speech abilities. The last one was the first one that affected her physically, at least permanently. A couple others temporarily, she couldn't, you know, use her right arm or something, but the last one pretty much affected her ability to walk. So she's in a wheelchair for the last 6 months. And but other than that, they were mostly cognitive and speech issues that affected her.
Okay. Well, as you and your family were going through this, when were the times that this weighed most heavily on your heart, where it was really hard to deal with?
Probably right after and around each stroke. I actually was with her when she went through one. She was in the hospital at one of the points, and was with her during one of the strokes. It was just really hard to watch that happen. And then to watch her struggle afterwards. You know, initially there was a little bit more effect each time, and over a couple of days the effects would wear off to some degree. So it's hard to watch the first few days particularly, especially with the speech part of it. As I said, she loved to talk and visit, and she knew she wasn't saying the right words. And you knew that she knew what the right words were deep inside, but they just wouldn't come out. And it was just really hard to watch that, and to watch her not be able to say what she wanted to say. And we had to learn to try to guess what she was trying to say. And I got pretty good at it till towards the end it was harder, but I got pretty good at guessing what she actually meant. And so I think the hardest part was watching it change her, and watching her struggle with communicating well, and just knowing that she wasn't thinking things through clearly. I think that was probably the biggest challenge. And it's never fun to watch someone that you care about go through stuff like that, because, you know, strokes are awful things.
Yeah, that's pretty serious stuff. Yeah. What helped you cope and helped you and your family get through this?
Well, one thing was, and this might sound, it was laughter. I mean, I learned early on you had to laugh or you'd go crazy. And so even though she would do and say some crazy things, we just laughed about it, because as a way of dealing with it. Otherwise, the stress just weighed down on you too much. And obviously, our faith in Christ made a big difference. Mom has been a believer all of her life, and I have as well. And just knowing that we had Christ to go to for prayer, and just for whatever reason made it much easier to deal with and to work through it together. And I know that that's what kept her going till the end too. So.
Well, do you have words of advice to somebody else that's looking at going through the same thing that you and your family went through?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot the last week or so since you first called about just like how we dealt with all of this, and a lot of things came to mind. One was the laughter part of it. You have to not be afraid to have moments of humor in the midst of all the stress, because you're going to go crazy otherwise. The second part of it, it's a difficult process to adjust to becoming the parent of your parents. Obviously, they parent you until a certain point and guide your steps, and at some point, I had to start making decisions for her and for Dad before that, to whether it's Dr. Holmes' advice or whatever, just give them direction and guide them, and that was a huge transition. And I think you just do it. You just do what you have to do, and you realize that in order to help them make the best decisions, you have to be there with them during that process. Another part of it was it's difficult to make those decisions, but I realized early on that I had to make the best decision every day that I could based on what I knew that day. And there's some things looking back I probably would change, especially with Dad, but I had to make the best decision every day that I could based on what I knew that day. You can't make decisions based on what you don't know, and so just obviously pray about it and make the best choice you can that day based on what you know, and go with that. It's a difficult process to adjust to caring for parents, and you just have to take each day one at a time, really, and do the best that you possibly can, and hopefully look back with no regrets at the end. So.
All right, Rick, thank you so much. That's wonderful advice.
Grief may be triggered by the death of a loved one. People can also experience grief if they have an illness for which there is no cure, or a chronic condition that affects their quality of life.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Our show is about coping with grief and loss, and here in the studio ready to answer your questions are Dr. Deborah Johnston, Dr. Peter Reynen, and on-call medical editor Dr. Rick Holm. I figured they just know from the title who is here. Dr. Rick.
Yes.
You can call in right now with your questions. Our phone number is 1-888-DOCTOR-ON-CALL. Again, that's 1-888-376-6225. Doctors, we had...
Isn't it time for a prostate joke of some kind?
I'm just wondering why you don't give out his home phone and cell phone.
Oh, yeah.
because he knows where I live. Here's somebody that wrote in or called in with some advice that worked for them. A gentleman said that for him it worked to write a letter to the person who has passed every night just to say how your day was, and soon your days will get better. So that's, I suppose, a way to focus on the more positive, the memories of.
So he writes a letter to his wife who passed
didn't
away,
say
or
who
whoever
it was. But
yeah,
that's
I
really
think
neat.
that's a common therapeutic technique of writing out your thoughts, and I want to say like the Rogerian model, that people can work through their issues if they work through them. If you just kind of try and shovel them under the carpet or whatever and bury them or suppress them, then that never goes very well for anything. So that technique is actually probably a very good one to try.
So you're suggesting, I mean, it's interesting that we had finished this last comment about, well, there's time for medicine. And I have two dear friends who are counselors who are not necessarily in favor of medicines. They really want to do counseling first. And instead of what a typical theory was maybe 10 years ago is, people don't dwell on all of these things that make people sad. Just move forward, put them on medicines, make them happy, and they'll come out of it. And I believe that there are things deep inside of a person from their childhood and things that really are good to come out and discover it, work it out, and face those things, and then you can move on better. Do you believe that?
Well, you just said a lot of things there. Yes, everything in our life affects everything else, and it builds and it builds and it goes on that. So the patterns that we learned watching my parents grieve when their parents died, some families just do not talk about death and loss, and some people and families are very open about that. So the patterns, our own tendencies and predispositions, our present circumstance and situation, everything affects everything.
And is it good to talk about those things that might be, demons, in, skeletons in a closet in your past?
Yeah, that tends to take some of the poison out of them and becomes easier each time, whether we're talking about PTSD for veterans or others who have uncommon experiences of emotional trauma to to talk through that and work through that takes some of that energy out of that and can help people move on.
And you touched on talking about death more when we're youth, and we need to talk about that. But before we do that, Deb, what about the idea of bringing back the skeletons? Talking about old.
I think it's critical. I think that I very rarely give people medication without talking to them about counseling. And some of my patients would tell you that I rather insist on counseling, because I think that there are some cases of pure endogenous depression. It's all neurochemical and neurohormonal.
They lack it's right there. It's not their fault, nobody's fault, nothing that
happened. I think fault is a bad way to put it. I don't think fault is appropriate, but there are things that we've learned that are maladaptive, that aren't helping your situation, that aren't helping you to recover. There are things that you need to work through, and some people have wonderful support. They've got just a fabulous support system in their lives, family, friends, and even those people can often really use an impartial person to go talk to, because they can't necessarily say everything they need to say, because they censor out of concern for how what they have to say is going to impact the person who's listening.
I would dare say that every one of us, I don't care how mentally healthy you are, I know you guys are very mentally healthy, and I am, but we would benefit and I can say I have benefited from counselors in my lifetime. And truly think that and you know, sometimes, as one particular person said to me, well, sometimes we don't have counselors, we have friends.
Okay. Play the devil's advocate. What if you're like me and you get hung up and obsess and worry and back to the guilt, and you feel bad, and that's what you want to talk about, and you keep trying to talk about the answer, and there isn't an answer or a solution, or you should have done, and you're just going down that path.
See, that's what a counselor can do, don't you think? Really help you realize, okay, there's another path. Let's try this. Okay. Think about it.
But there are circumstances where people really have really difficult time doing that, and there is a role and a place for medicine, and that would be one of the things, the tipping point again, to push that. When the grief begins to affect your health and more of a permanent, not just I've got a sick stomach for a week, but when it starts to affect health issues, when it starts to affect the other healthy relationships you have with children or important people, when you're stuck on that issue and you're not finding that, hey, I'm enjoying this ball game, or I had a great cup of tea today with a friend of mine, when you can never get to that point, and never's a long time, but we usually talk about somewhere between two to 3 months, depending on how things are going. And then maybe there's something, I would prescribe medicines for that person to try.
There's a time for
when
medicine.
It's dominating your life, when the grief is all you experience for most of that 24 hours in that day.
Grief has to claim, it's one life that's been claimed, not two. Okay. That person who's still living has to still live.
We have a caller from Rapid City, and they really are in a tough situation. A lady lost 2 sisters to cancer in the last 4 years. Now this lady has brain cancer and is dying. Ugh. How does she deal with the grief she's going through and get through her own struggle?
There you go. I'll make a comment. As I help people who are dealing with terminal cancer or who have terrible illnesses that you know, I think that you encourage them to do what we all should be doing, which is to enjoy the day we do have, instead of taking that whatever time she has left and dwelling on all of the misery until it's all you used up the time that you have. We all are only here for a little bit, old saying, and then we're all gone. Let's take the time that we do have, and of course there's time to mourn, and then there's a time to move on. Deb, you agree?
This poor woman.
Yeah, she's.
I'm crying again. This poor woman. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I knew I was going to do this.
If she came to you, would you?
I'd cry with her.
Is that should she look for someone to unburden herself with?
Yes. Yes. I think this is someone who, first off, It says that she's dying from her brain cancer. This is someone who may benefit greatly from hospice, which is a wonderful program that got touched on a little bit already, but I think probably something we should talk some more about, because hospice is not just for the dying person, but for the people they leave behind.
Yeah. I'm the director of the hospice here,
So
which is one of the reasons why the singing thing fell in so perfectly well. I said to Steve Greaves, I know the director of the hospice. He said, well, who's that? Me. We meet every Tuesday noon, and at Tuesday noon, the director of hospice and the nurses and the people involved say, you know, this person would really appreciate it, some singing. And hospice is a group of, actually what it really is it's a financial support from the government. It's a Medicare benefit.
That's the framework. That's not what it really is.
No, but
it really is about living at the end of
It is an
life.
added benefit from Medicare that you can take advantage of if you fulfill the requirements.
It's not just for Medicare patients.
No, it is not. You're right. Thank you for jumping all over me, but still, I wanted to make.
Someone's got to keep you straight.
This is what I spend most of my day doing.
You know, that person is in a situation that's hard for me to comment on, because I'm just not. I've never been there. What I can say is what I've seen is, and a counselor would maybe help with this, but to go through the issues about what are the fears and what are the hopes on that. Well, is there anger involved at what she may be missing at having things taken away, and maybe thinking of things in my terms. I would say, is there an adventure in this? Is there something to look forward to in all of this that offers a brighter promise than just the here and now and what happens tomorrow or what happens in 6 months or 6 years? None of that's guaranteed.
I think that's beautiful, and I think this person. I think you don't know what's going to happen. That's the other thing. You give a person, when you're giving them bad news, of course, the truth of the matter is you don't know that it's bad. There might be good things. And you don't know how long this means. I mean, we're all terminal. How long is it going to be before you die? Well, we don't know. I don't know when I'm going to die. I don't know when you're going to die. Let's just take today. Okay. Well, I wanted to finish on hospice. It is a added Medicare benefit and other insurance company benefit, but the bottom line is it's a group of people who are there to support someone who is shifted from cure to comfort. And they talk about 6 months to live or whatever it might be. That's a bad framework. Better time to quit all of these therapeutic things now is to try to not take away anything, but to give you comfort. There's a time for comfort.
An integrated program to maximize quality of life so that people can have the death that they want.
Yeah.
And it's, as you said, I think it's not just for the patient, it's for the family and that whole support system around it, because it doesn't end when, somebody takes their last breath and then they punch out the clock and they've left. It's all about preparing the people that are around, the survivors, to move on and to move through grief and to prepare for these things as best, if you can prepare for them.
They
to
provide
prepare
for a year after the death of that person.
And it's an ongoing service. That's very important.
So is it just here's some strong pain pills, or is there, what kind of help can hospital, tangible things?
Pain control is a part of it.
Yeah, the pharmacist comes to every meeting and we analyze all the meds that the person's on. I mean, we look at the pharmacy. We have a spiritual leader that comes, a minister that's part of it, and they think about the spiritual needs. The social workers, and our social worker is a very spiritual person, and it joins with the minister. The nurses are there. They have home health visiting people to help keep the house clean. They have beds that are helpful. They have equipment that's helpful, and
hotlines to call for help 24/7.
It's just a fabulous thing.
All these people are meeting and talking about me, the hospice patient.
Right. And by the way, hospice is taking a big hit from the government withdrawal because everything's being cut back.
Yeah, this is the government death panels that they wanted to talk about.
Now, let's not get political.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, okay, political religion. Now, we're going here now.
Okay, lead us, Cameron.
Let's talk about taxes.
One of my religious beliefs is kind of, having to do with not dealing with church stuff on a Thursday night. I'm like Wednesday, Sunday morning, that's maximum for me. But when you're talking about end-of-life issues, spirituality can become a real important part for some people. So let's talk about that. And is hospice going to force religion on somebody that doesn't want it?
No. All religions are accepted in this group, and the minister...
And no religion is accepted.
Right. The minister does not... They say, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go with this? How are you comfortable? Can I help you in any way? Doesn't matter. There's no religion. You know, if you think about the beauty of all religions, the most important, some has said that the backbone of every religion is justice and compassion. And if that person presents justice and compassion, fairness, you know, everything they can to give the compassion and the just care that that person needs, then you've fulfilled most religions' needs. My comment. Well, what's your comment about spirituality? Do you pray with your patients?
I do. If that's something that they're comfortable with or they want to do, I'll ask. So, yes, that comes up from time to time. Or with families on the bedside before somebody dies, after, when someone has hip surgery. I mean, anything. And that may be a circumstance unique to my situation
as a minister
and comfort level with those things. But if my patients are interested in it and it affects their health, I talk to them about it and I do my part, or I find somebody who can. Right. So it's not about, one size fits all.
I got another question for you. Now, if I have...
With the finger pointing, too.
Yes, so this is an important one.
Okay.
If I'm an individual who religion has not played a major role in my life, and then I'm suddenly facing a crisis and I feel a need to turn to spirituality, is that okay, or am I like a faker because, now I want something, now I'm asking for help?
Now that you're dying, now that you're in need, is that hypocritical?
Yeah.
No, is the really short answer.
No, it is not.
It's okay.
Yes.
When I need...
Yeah. When is the best time to turn then? To turn. It's any time. I mean, and part of this, and when we're talking in my mind about grief and about bereavement, is that we have this idea that somehow things shouldn't be taken away from me, that this belongs to me and it's mine, and when it's taken away, it's like my kid when I took away the sucker, or when the other kid took away the toy. There's this anger and this loss, and part of, at least my faith experience would be that if these things don't belong to me in the first place, but belong to someone else, and still belong to that somebody else, though there's pain in loss, that's a coping, maybe someone would say that's just a coping, fantasy of yours, but it works. And if it works, then I'm going to persist in that. And in my own tradition, Christian tradition, that's the thief on the cross. That's pretty last minute. And that person wasn't rejected for that, but there's always an opening. And whether that person's religious beliefs move toward Wiccan or none or Islamic, hospice is open to all of those things, and it's about what that person needs, not what I need that person to have, but what that person wants and needs. It's directed.
I had a biology professor who was dying of cancer, and he blossomed with it. He felt the spirituality of the birds and the life and the connectedness between. I mean, the connectedness that came. It makes me cry to think about it. It's such a beautiful circle of life. There's a line on there. Yeah. But the beauty of that whole story, and it was religious and very spiritual, although it didn't have any particular church tied to it. I just wanted to share that story.
We go that with the patients, and somewhere along the way, you have that talk. Don't confuse religion with faith or spirituality. Hopefully there's a connection, but there isn't always. But that's another show, probably.
We're supposed to be in the wrap-up. We had some questions we didn't get to. We'll try to post the answers on our website, but I'm going to throw some quickies out at you. If a loved one dies, what effect does donating their organs have on the grieving process? Is it easier
We've got
or
one
harder?
minute before we're done, and there might be another question.
Easier or harder to cope with the loss if your loved one donates organs?
Depends.
I'd say short-term harder, long-term easier.
Okay. A gentleman lost his grandmother. His mother is taking it hard and sleeping a lot. Should he be worried about her? At what point does bereavement become depression?
Sleeping a lot is depression.
Sleeping versus not sleeping. That's just not always, but sounds like depression.
Get some help.
Some of it would depend on how long ago, too. I mean, if it was last week, we cut her a little more slack.
And we need to be allowed to mourn, don't we?
Yeah.
How long?
At least 50 years, apparently, according to my guy. So.
We don't let people mourn in this culture.
It's okay.
This is true.
We don't have to cover it up with medicines either. We can mourn with them.
Oh, we probably have like 10 seconds for you
Last
to
comment.
say something wise.
Don't be afraid to cry. I'm crying in front of thousands of people tonight, so don't be afraid to cry. If I can do it on public
grief
TV.
is what healthy people do.
There you go. Thank you so much for being here.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with the Homespun Perspective and then what's new in medical science.
Looking for reliable healthcare information online? You can start with the resources link at the On-Call website. From there, you can access a variety of accurate and dependable information sources, including the South Dakota State Department of Health and Medline Plus.
Before my junior year in high school, I returned from a Boy Scout canoeing trip to discover that my sister had been killed in a car crash. I will never forget the sadness of the moment when I walked into the house that was filled with what seemed like half the caring and wonderful town of De Smet to find my mom and dad there grieving. It was near the end of that summer, but the beginning of a long period of mourning for my family and me. There were lessons that came to me after my sister's death. I realized how important support from a community could be. Consolation came from our friends, neighbors, church community, as well as people who barely knew us. It seemed more about their presence, I might add, than their words. I noticed there were people who had trouble themselves dealing with such loss, and they sort of disappeared. Also, I realized that a funeral is not exactly a time of closure for a family, but really just the beginning of a time to accept reality and to forge ahead with the difficult changes that life can and does deal out. It took me years to think about my sister and relish in her memory, rather than cringe from the pain of the loss. In that sense, I know I will never have closure, and that's good. Some 14 years after her death, while I was on the faculty of a medical school in Georgia, I found myself having to advise medical students how to talk to patients or family about sad news. I reviewed the medical literature on the subject at the time and concluded that really there is no right way to do it except to be 100% honest and to say whatever is needed with compassion. Through the years, those guidelines have sustained me while I've had the burden of sharing awful news. Bottom line, it's being there more than words that consoles. Never worry about what to say, just show up, be honest, and care. We'll be right back.
In our medical news tonight, we're on the cusp of April, and April is National Parkinson Awareness Month. Parkinson's disease is a disease without a cure, and individuals living with Parkinson's disease face symptoms that increase over time. Trembling hands, poor balance, and trouble swallowing or speaking are all symptoms of Parkinson's. Treatment for Parkinson's can help alleviate symptoms, but again, this is not a disease that can be cured yet, and it's something that has to be lived with. That's why the upcoming Parkinson Awareness Month conference in Sioux Falls is so valuable. The conference will offer information on the benefits of exercise, diet, movement, music, and humor when it comes to moderating the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. The conference begins at 5 p.m. on Friday, April 29th, and concludes the next day, Saturday, April 30th at 4 p.m. It's an incredible opportunity to learn about the disease and meet and get to know other individuals, both patients and caregivers, who have made Parkinson awareness a priority in their lives. To find out more, you can go to the Parkinson Association of South Dakota website. Their address is parkinsonsd.org. Again, that web address is parkinsonsd.org. And if you want to call them, their phone number is 605-271-6113. Again, the phone number for the Parkinson Association of South Dakota is 605-271-6113. 6113. You can call them to get details about this conference. And that is all the time we have for this evening. Time to wrap things up. Remember, On Call is rebroadcast on SDPB Digital Channel 2, Mondays at 11 a.m. Central, Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Central. And again, thanks to our guests, Dr. Deborah Johnston, Dr. Peter Reynen, and of course our medical editor, Dr. Rick Holm. Thanks to our phone volunteers, and thanks to you for watching and calling in. Have a good evening.
Funding for this program is provided in part by
Avera is a proud sponsor of On Call on South Dakota Public Television.
and by the South Dakota Foundation for Medical Care, the Medicare Quality Improvement Organization for South Dakota. Additional funding provided by Dakota Care, the Brookings Health System, Regional Health, the South Dakota American College of Physicians, and Swiftel Communications. Closed captioning for On Call is provided by the generous support of Avera, the Brookings Health System, and Fishback Financial Corporation.
To learn more about life and health, you can order your copy of The Picture of Health, a beautiful book containing insightful essays and evocative images by on-call medical editor Dr. Rick Holm and Dr. Judith Peterson. This book, containing healthcare advice, stories of medical history, and meditations on healing, can now be yours for $17 at the South Dakota Ag Heritage Museum. Call 1-877-227-0015 to order. This offer is made by Ag Biocommunications at South Dakota State University.
Have you been hospitalized? What do you have in the hospital right now?
I just have a patient who had her knee replaced.
You want to talk about preparing people for surgery? Pre-op evaluation?
Rick, do you like the rest of your cookies?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Tammy.
You want to?
Thank you. Did you want a cookie?
No, I'm
good.
Here. How much? Oh.
He's not going first? Oh, okay.
Who do you have? Do you have anybody in the hospital right now?
No.
Who'd you see today?
Who'd I see today? I was on call today, so I just saw a little girl with strep throat. Maybe we could talk about strep.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Sore throats.
Sore throats. Don't just call in and want an antibiotic.
Don't do that.
Okay.
Everybody.
Antibiotics for colds. That's a good idea.
Oh. It can't be talked about enough.
No, it really can't. You can talk about something besides things that make me cry.